Okay, everybody. So we are here a little bit early, right before 8 o'clock Eastern here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Cam K here for the Stickers and Scuffs podcast. And wow, what a great race. That was fantastic. All the fear I think we had for the next gen car was that there wasn't going to be good racing, that it was going to be a bit of a mess. And the weekend started off that way at California Speedway. It definitely was a little chaotic and didn't give the drivers and teams a lot in terms of track time before going out and, well, putting it to the test. But overall, I'm going to go off and say I thought that this was one of the most entertaining races I have seen in the NASCAR Cup Series in many years. Throughout the entire event, it felt like the race went by actually quite quickly, which if you know anything about California Speedway in the past, those races felt like they dragged on quite a lot. And I think that for the most part, we saw a race that offered basically everything to me that made the NASCAR Winston Cup Series so appealing to me. It had mechanical issues, it had lead changes, it had passing, it had drivers spinning out on their own. It wasn't just from contact. You had issues with the leader, you had teammates getting into another. And then at the end, you had a guy who hadn't led the race the entire time who comes out and gets the victory, but he wasn't automatically going to be the favorite to win because he got passed on the last restart. So ultimately, a very successful event here at California Speedway. Both days, in fact, were fantastic. The Xfinity Series race was definitely I would say it wasn't as good as the Cup race, and I don't think that that's really been the case for many of those events the last couple of years. The reality is that the Xfinity Series has put on the top quality events. They have put on races that are fantastic through and through. Yesterday was a little bit more of a dominant performance. You had a Cup guy in the race who he pretty well dominated in a car that was pretty well prepared by Stewart-Haas Racing, but owned by SS Greenlight. So obviously that's fantastic to see that SS Greenlight, Bobby Daughter finally getting a race victory. But at the end of the day, we can say that the Cup Series, this didn't fail, in my opinion. This was a solid race through and through. There was a pole sitter and a battle for the pole that was second to none. We haven't seen pole competition like that, where whoever was fastest didn't automatically mean that they were going to sweep and make it the front row in their first group and then in the final. It didn't happen like that. You had drivers getting loose, you had drivers spinning out, and not just the fact that it was one or two or three guys. These were champion drivers that were spinning out. And when you have something like Brad Keselowski spins out on his own, Kyle Busch spins out on his own, that means these cars are hard to drive. That makes them appealing. This entire race felt like that. It felt like anybody could lose it at any time. You also got to see, and this was the most refreshing thing for me, at one point in this race, I actually had tweeted it out, and I almost it doesn't seem real in a way, because the history of this series is that we've really seen Penske, SHR, Hendrick Motorsports, they've been the dominant force, and you had multiple cars from their race teams in the top 10. But at one point, we had Hendrick, Penske, RCR, Petty GMS, Trackhouse, JGR, SHR, JTG, and Front Row. You had 9 teams represented in the top 10. And that was prior to that final caution coming out. Unheard of if you look at the past history. This is something that they wanted. This is something that NASCAR has definitely been trying to achieve, and they did it. They got a car that helped the competition level for everybody. Obviously, it's spec. It means everybody's running the same thing. Who would have thought that running a spec car would make such an interesting race? Well, there's a lot of things that still need to be worked out. It's true. I think the biggest and most obvious thing is that these cars, when they lose tires, they cannot roll. They get stuck. There needs to be something. Now, there's a lot of people that are losing their minds over this. Now, I'm of the belief, well, if you spin, you should have a penalty of sorts because you spun your car. You shouldn't just be able to just pick up where you were. You have to battle back. And that's what we saw today. Cars and teams having to battle back. Daniel Hemrick battled back. Chase Elliott battled back. Kyle Busch battled back. These names were able to get their cars out of that damage zone and get them back on the track and finish. I mean, Chase's race we'll get to a little bit later. It kind of fell off a cliff towards the end, thanks to some friendly competition, some friendly fire in a way. But the dominant force in this race was Tyler Reddick. He and Eric Jones were the dominant cars throughout the entire event. But at the end of the race, it did not come down to Tyler Reddick or Eric Jones. It came between Joey Logano, the 99 of Daniel Suarez, the 5 of Kyle Larson, and the 3 of Austin Dillon. Now, Austin Dillon came from absolutely nowhere to make his way up into the top 3 and have a chance at winning this race. Unfortunately, he did not do so, despite being the surprise, I guess you'd say, of the top 10. It was not something, especially after how awful Austin's week was at Daytona. I'm definitely of the belief that his race at Daytona was just a fluke. I think that they're going to be really good this year. The entirety of RCR is showing that they have speed in their cars this year. We've seen Austin Hill in the Xfinity Series. Austin Hill won the Daytona race. So clearly they've got their Xfinity program. They got Sheldon Creed in there. The GMS, Petty GMS, I was not expecting anything from. I will be completely honest. I was not expecting anything from Petty GMS. The shock and awe of the Petty team putting on a performance. They said, I think it was Bobby Labonte in 2007. It was the last time that he had a race that successful. I don't know what's going on with my light. I think it's just like died. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to be out of the light here for a little bit, folks. But it is remarkable when you go to these races, and the fact that we've kind of had, I would call Kyle Larson, he was a surprise winner in this event because he wasn't dominating. He didn't run up front most of this race. That's something that we can look forward to. If that's going to be something that we're going to see week in and week out, that you're going to have races where it isn't predictable. And I will say today was not predictable. You had guys like Chase Briscoe that got up front. William Byron was up there. Obviously, Eric Jones was up there for quite a bit as well. But there was a lot of guys that came from the back to the front, to the back to the front. And that's what made this event so much fun. It was so unpredictable, which is exactly something that NASCAR needs. Once you get predictable, then fans don't want to come back because they know what's going to happen. Now, obviously, you didn't know Kyle Larson was going to win this race. He was a good pick, that's for sure. But he wasn't the outright favorite. In fact, most of the race, he was kind of just around. He wasn't up front. He was in the top 5, top 10, but he wasn't out there leading. Joey Logano, Austin Cindric up there at some points. We had a pretty obvious rough day for Kyle Busch. And what really started was his week at California Speedway was rough. Despite having a pretty fast car in the qualifying sessions, his race did not start off very well. He didn't feel like the car was going to make it in qualifying. He thought it was going to blow up, and it pretty much sucked the life out of JGR. They had multiple cars running hot. And that's something, again, that these guys, these teams are all used to the old cars. They're all used to the old ways of things. Now, all of a sudden, you've got a new car that they have to learn. Each track is going to prevent or cause issues for teams. No matter what happens, there will be issues with this car. Now, obviously, flat tires are the biggest. This is something that we saw at Daytona. What we did not see today, thank goodness, was loose wheels. I think the teams will get over and they will learn how to adapt with those loose wheels. These are professional race teams. They will get used to it. They will figure things out. But the flat tire situation is not something that is in their court. That is a NASCAR deal. NASCAR will need to make some sort of decision here what they're going to do, because there's penalty for spinning out your car automatically. But to go 3 or 4 laps down because you can't move your car forward because you've got flat tires, that's a little bit more of a problem. Now, we've seen in the V8 supercars when they get flats as well, they're kind of debilitated. That's what happens. But you're able to roll still. The problem here is if you get a flat tire and you can't roll. And that's what we've seen is every time a guy does have a flat tire, they're not really able to get out of it. So what does NASCAR do here? Well, they've come up with some sort of a solution, an interim solution, which is that they'll hook the car up and tow it back to the pits instead of going on the flatbed. Now, obviously, if the car can run and the car can move, it should not be going on the flatbed at all. That's where there needs to be some sort of a plan here. Now, whether that's hooking the car up on something that'll keep it not hitting the ground, because that was the biggest, I think, concern with towing them, is that they'll damage the diffuser on the back of the cars. Well, they're going to have to come up with something, because the amount of flat tires, amount of cars that have gotten stuck over the entire weekend, not just in the race, it was too many to count. Now, the other thing they have to remember is that these cars are being used multiple races. So Ross Chastain has basically, they've used up their backup car. What was interesting is the mention of Kevin Harvick damaging his car. They repaired it, and they mentioned that there was only one backup for the entire organization, 4 cars, and they only got one backup. So you wreck more than one car, you're screwed. They might have a point where a team may not be able to make a race unless they have a proper amount of backups. And it's just part of the process here. When we talked with Brian Murphy from Stewart Haas Racing, he said, like, the part shortages, that's legit. This is something that they'll get used to, they'll figure it out. But for the meantime, they're going to need to decide what type of risks are we going to take. Ultimately, racers are racers, and they're not just going to sit back. They're going to fight and claw and scratch for any position on the track, but within reason. Unfortunately, the dominant car of the day involved in a wreck close to the end of the race, not completely to the end, but after dominating, Tyler Reddick gets a flat tire. William Byron, unfortunately, gets into him, crashes them both. And unfortunately, William Byron out of the race. He was not alone. Christopher Bell, Chris Buescher also involved, damage to their cars in incidents. Bell, I believe, had, again, flat tire situations, but the overall issue is there's a couple. The tire being flat, that can happen. The cars are so low to the ground, they really don't have a way to keep them up. But the suspension being so fragile is another part of the problem. And people can gripe and complain all they want. This is actually a very good thing. Parity with mechanical failures, parity with on-track incidents is what you need in motorsports. That's what, in fact, was missing from NASCAR for many years. When I started watching NASCAR in 2002, it was normal that you would have cars that would not finish the race for a various amount of reasons, mechanically based, whether or not that was suspension, handling, whether it was engine failure, whether it was flat tire, whether it was crash damage. There was many reasons why that would happen. So now you have NASCAR in a situation where that is happening again. And I welcome it, because it means that the things are difficult. It means that the teams have to learn and they have to grow, and it may change who is going to be the dominant force. I think we saw it multiple times today that championship favorites were the guys that were struggling the most. And that is a good thing, because again, parity. 9 teams in the top 10 are different. When's the last time that we've had that, aside from a plate race? It brings more people interested, because they're not going to go out and see somebody go out and lead the entire race and win it. There's differences. Now, the biggest conversation for California Speedway over the last 2 years was that it was going to be demolished and turned into a short track. If this is how the next gen car is going to perform, I'm going to be of the belief that that does not need to happen. Now, obviously, there is going to be other tracks that will be affected by this new car. Atlanta Motor Speedway will be a very interesting one, because they've completely repaved that track. Whether or not that's actually going to work out, we'll have to hit the track and see, especially when you have situations where cars are getting flat tires. Atlanta is not the place to have one of those. You don't want flat tires at that track. We've seen how damaging flat tires are to race cars at normal facilities. Well, now they've widened Atlanta Motor Speedway. They've narrowed up the corners, I believe, but they've widened the front stretch. And the belief is that there is going to be some sort of a drafting component there. If that is the case, there's potential for some major wrecks at Atlanta, and it's for cars that we don't need to see that with, especially these brand new Gen 7s. Starting the season so far, I would say that the biggest surprise has been the amount of parity so far right off the bat. I don't think people expected to see it, but they like it. Daniel Suarez being 2 laps away from race victory, Austin Dillon having a chance to win it. The closeness at California Speedway today was a very good, it's a very good lesson that maybe we don't jump to conclusions when NASCAR is going to make changes. Perhaps they give it a little bit of extra time, like they did with this new car. They gave it an opportunity, and now maybe we'll see California Speedway stick around in its current format, and perhaps another track that is currently on the schedule will get that short track feel. Now, I think the success that they had at the Coliseum definitely changes. It definitely changes the reasoning behind creating a short track, because I think the original reason that they were doing that was so that they had a short track in the LA market, that they had it in California specifically. Well, now we're looking at it, and it's not as attractive after this race, but the question still remains, will they still be putting in a 2023 short track on the schedule, 2024 maybe? We know Nashville's fairgrounds is the expectation. But if you had a choice, would you take some opportunities to fill in your schedule with more short tracks that maybe have not been thought of? I would go out and say that there's many a track. We know Kentucky Speedway is not currently on the schedule anymore. That would be an opportunity for them to go to the Kentucky market and use that track as their short track that they were hoping for. Whether or not that's in the plans, you just don't know. Iowa Speedway, we've talked about sitting idle. It's not really got hope right now. But if Cup wanted to go to a short track, that would be the place to go because it's already an existing facility that they've run at before. Now, the other option, of course, is I think it's going to come down to Michigan or Texas. And obviously, Michigan Speedway has its fans. I would say Texas Motor Speedway doesn't have as many fans. But if you're going to run the All-Star race at Texas Motor Speedway for consecutive years following this year, short track deal is the way to go. But at the same time, I am of the belief, and I've been a believer of this since they announced the plan to demolish California Speedway and make the LA Coliseum, is that there are so many short tracks across America, Canada, Mexico that they could go to and really show and help those racetracks with revenue. The problem is, and this is something I have learned recently, is that NASCAR they have their own standards, whether a track is too big or too small, and certain tracks have to be up to their standards. And that is the biggest and hardest hurdle for them. So as we go forward, it is going to be very interesting to see how this schedule change will exist next year, because the belief is that they're going to go short track racing a little bit more. And I'm of the belief that you don't need a Richmond Raceway. That's not a short track anymore. It doesn't race like one. Now I'm hoping that with these new cars, it will race like it used to. I'm hoping that we'll see a lot more raciness on the short tracks with these cars. Obviously, you can't really compare them to the Coliseum because of the size difference, but I'm very excited at the future. This is Cam K for the Stickers and Scuffs podcast. I want to thank you guys for tuning in tonight. Just a short review of the race. Not too many people out there right now interested in chatting, which hey, I get it. This is the biggest issue with running these races at this time, is that they end a lot later in the day. So definitely thank you guys for tuning in. If you have taken the time to tune in today, if you give us a like and subscribe, we really appreciate it. We will be back mostly every week. We try to cover the races as much as we can. Obviously, we are way more into the NASCAR Pinty series, the APC United Late Model series, Quick Super Stock series, and the Ontario Sportsman series. You'll see us across all of those 4 divisions this season in Ontario, Canada. Obviously, Pinty Series is our bread and butter. That is the one that we showcase the most. We want to give as much love and respect to our Canadian racers and our Canadian series, and definitely keep some interest there for some sponsorship. And we'll be out there this year, so definitely keep tuned here to see some more of that. That's obviously what we like to talk about. And Graydon and myself are huge Pinty Series fans. That's why we started this channel, and we are going to continue with that heading into the rest of 2022. But the race at California, it was indeed a very successful weekend. In my opinion, it was one of the best races I've ever seen at California Speedway. And the parity of the Cup Series right now is definitely an attraction for people. I think that the crowd looked pretty healthy at California Speedway as well. And I'll be very interested to see how the ratings are after, of course, the Daytona 500's ratings. Thank you all for tuning in. Have yourselves a great night. Cam K signing off, and we will chat with you all later this week. Yeah, this is the